One of the jobs I'm doing on the club bike is to replace a chain and sprockets, and it's not heavily pronounced, but the you can just about see that the teeth on the front sprocket are slightly hooked, and you can push the chain a fair way out of the teeth. Let's see if I can get you a better angle on this. It's not desperately bad, but it could do with a new chain and sprockets. So that's what we'll do. Obviously I've got to get the back wheel out. Now Marini's, it's not generally sort of widely talked about, but they have what's called a quick detach rear wheel. And that nut is on the end of the rear wheel spindle. And that nut is on the stub spindle that holds the sprocket carrier. And you can take the rear wheel out without actually disturbing the chain and sprockets. Now I've already made a start on this job. Took the silencer off. I usually do that by just removing the foot peg hanger plate, or foot peg, sorry, removing the passenger foot peg which holds the exhaust hanger plate complete, rather than taking the silencer off the hanger plate itself. Backed off the brake adjuster and unhooked it, and don't forget the brake torque arm, and that can just be pulled out, sprung off the bolt, and out the way and unhooked. So I'll see if I can get a decent angle, get the camera up on the tripod, and take you through taking the wheel out. That's a 19mm nut on the spindle. I need to put a Tommy bar through the other end to stop it turning. Like the washer here has been slightly damaged and is sticking. There we go. Now, one of the big advantages of having a proper hydraulic bike bench having a removable plate to drop the wheel through. So I'm pulling the spindle whilst supporting the wheel. And if I'm careful, I can. That's the torque arm unhooked, that's the plate removed, and one of the chain adjusters, and then I can remove the rear brake back plate, and then the wheel just lifts off the cush drive, and I can drop it out the bottom. And if you were just working on the brakes, or you were doing a tyre puncture repair or tyre replacement, then the chain is left in place and the adjustment isn't affected. And there's just another nut, 28mm as I recall, but I haven't got anything that size, so we'll use the adjustable. And this is a very fine thread, so they shouldn't be over tightened, and when you're putting them back together in particular, you make very sure that the threads aren't crossed. There we go, so sprocket carrier, which has its own set of bearings. It's the cush drive rubbers, and they're feeling a little notchy. I may well just replace those whilst we've got it apart. The ones in the front wheel were fine. Let's just check the rear wheel bearings. Now they're yeah, the rear wheel bearings don't feel all that hot. I should have all that stuff in stock. So not quite so easy at the side of the road. If you can park the back wheel hanging over the road, use the curb to get a bit of extra height. It is just about possible depending on the state of your centre stand, and with a bit of wiggling and swearing you can usually get the back wheel out. Okay, we've got the sprocket carrier, which is mounted on this little stub axle for which the main axle passes, and you can probably hear the bearings don't sound too good, so I keep a pile of spacers and general junk near to the press for this sort of work, and I found a bit of tubing that fits over the bearing housing. I've pressed them in the past, supporting them out here, because they're not very tight in the bearings, but it's a good idea to support it closer. And I have a piece of Delrin from something that will fit over the nose of the ram, and I think will be strong enough for the job. Yeah, not really tight at all. It's not going to quite fall out. But that's, I'm not going to touch it with gloves. I'll grab some rag to pull that out. I've moved over to the vise, and I've got the bit of tubing I was using before in the vise, and there's a block underneath it, so it's supported from underneath, and in between the two bearings is a spacer, and you can just move it far enough to one side to get something onto the edge of the bearing to drive it out. So I've just got this bit of gash tubing slightly pushed to one side, and tilt it the other way. And that's one bearing out, plus the spacer. So then I'll invert it and drive the other bearing out, plus the seal. And that's really all there is to it. If you do come across bearings that are stubborn to remove, then warming the hub up is a good move, and a hot air paint stripper works and is an effective tool for that. I've given the sprocket carrier a quick pass through the glass bead blaster, and done the same with the stub axle and the bearing spacer. So I'm ready to reinstall the bearings, and these are 6004s, and I'm putting in sealed bearings rather than the open bearings that were in there originally. And as is common practice, but probably not the absolute ideal, I'm using a socket to press the bearing in, and the socket is actually a really nice fit, loose fit in the bearing pocket, so it's going to push on the bearing without hanging up in the housing at all. So just get everything lined up. That's down at the shoulder. Drop in the bearing spacer. I'm just going to fit the stub axle, keep everything lined up. Just need to realign the socket. And that's the bearings installed. And then we'll just push the axle down into position. And we're done. Apart from reinstalling the oil seal,